morning, everyone, and welcome to our virtual workshop. Our third webinar is a part of this virtual workshop series. This morning, we will be discussing planning for sustainable infrastructure. So if you were able to join us yesterday, we have identified some of the key players and motivation for sustainable infrastructure yesterday. And today's webinar, our second day of webinars, focuses more on action. The morning webinar that you're about to view will present the big picture actions Envision users are taking to progress toward more sustainable implementation of their infrastructure projects. We'll have leaders from within the public sector who will illustrate how the use of policies shaped by Envision has effectively streamlined their processes and guided protocol. Further programmatic approaches will also be presented through examples from a range of sectors. Now I'd like to turn it over to today's moderator. Anthony Kane is the president and CEO of the Institute for Sustainable Infrastructure. Welcome, Anthony.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining. For those of you who joined yesterday as well, thank you for returning for today's sessions of webinars. A special thanks to Lindsay Geiger, who, as you've heard, has organized this event in collaboration with Harvard University's Zoffness Program for Sustainable Infrastructure, our longtime partners. On that side, Judith Rodriguez, a special thanks to her as well for her involvement. As many of you know, this was originally intended as an in-person workshop at Harvard University, and under very short notice, Lindsay and Judith pivoted to what has so far been an incredibly successful online format and has reached far more people than we could have ever reached in the in-persons. So I think there was a silver lining there. For those of you who joined yesterday, you had the benefit of hearing from Dr. Joan Zoffness. I thought it was a really wonderful introduction to the sessions yesterday to have, many of us are familiar with sort of a safety minute to start off meetings. I kind of considered her commentary more of a mental health and safety minute, which was really important, that as all of us are working from home, we should be sure to take care of ourselves, both physically and mentally, setting aside time for ourselves, setting aside space, being cognizant of our own anxieties and mental health conditions, and making sure that we're reaching out for help when we need it. Just a note for all of us to take care during this time. You also heard from our board chair, John Williams, who had a specific call to action for all of us, that while right now we're obviously primarily concerned with containing the spread of the disease and minimizing loss of life, that there will be a time in the future where we recover from this, and at that time, sustainable and resilient infrastructure will be more critical than ever, and hopefully each of us throughout today can be thinking of what we can do and how we can contribute to ensure that in the future we are developing a sustainable and resilient world. I also shared yesterday just a few items. I think it's important, again, a lot of anxiety for many of us, to focus on a few notes of hope, things that we are positive that are happening in the world around us despite all of the negative. I listed a few yesterday, but very quickly, I think there are some positive signs around environmental rebound that we're seeing. You might be familiar with some of the stories that as humans around the world limit our activities, nature is bouncing back in certain areas faster than we might expect. And I hope we retain that lesson and learn from it and commit to environmental conservation and preservation even after the current situation has passed. I think we're all learning a lot about our personal habits, our consumption trends, and I think that's something as well that I hope we all retain, those lessons after this, that we think twice about what we consume and energy and water and food and what's really necessary in our lives and what's really important. And then I think we're also learning a lot about the interconnectedness of the planet. Now, those of us in the sustainability field have always known that we live in a world of integrated and interdependent systems, but I think the general population will come out of this with a greater appreciation as well of how truly interconnected we all are and how interdependent we all are. And I think that that is a strong message for sustainability and resilience. So with just those few words, I'd like to move on and start today's sessions, give you more time with the speakers we have lined up for you. In our first hour, we will start with two great speakers. First, Derek Tonning. Derek has worked as a sustainability-focused water resources engineer for the past 10 years, both domestically and abroad. In the New York City area, he has served as assistant director for the New York City Department of Environmental Protection's Green Infrastructure Program, and now works for HDR, focusing on coastal resilience and sustainable design projects. Currently, Mr. Tonning is serving as an on-site consultant for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey's Resilience and Sustainable Design Group, where he's leading the update for their sustainable design guidelines and the development of the new green infrastructure design guidelines. Following Derek, we'll have Yun Sim, a longtime supporter of ISI and Envision. As a 22-year veteran at Los Angeles County Public Works, Dr. Sim currently serves as the Public Works Sustainability and Innovation Officer. In 2012, he created the Public Works Sustainability Council. From 2014 to 2016, he led a think tank, the Innovation Laboratory. In 2016, he was appointed to lead the Strategic Planning and Sustainability Office, and has been managing the office since then. He is currently focusing on LA County infrastructure investment initiatives that explore innovative infrastructure investment strategies to enhance economic and equitable development of the county. And he received his PhD from the University of California, Irvine in civil engineering. Thank you, Derek and Yun, and we'll get started with Derek.
All right, just sharing the screen now. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Anthony, for those opening remarks and the introduction. Again, my name is Derek Tonning with HDR, and I'm actually filling in today for Josh DeFlorio. He's the Chief of Resilience and Sustainability in the Port Authority's Engineering and Architectural Design Division. So I work under Josh's group as a full-time sustainable design consultant. And one of my primary responsibilities in this role is leading the update of Port Authority Sustainable Infrastructure Guidelines. And as we'll see, the update will be modeled after Envision version 3 framework, and there'll be some modifications to suit the unique set of facilities and processes that the Port Authority has. So for those of you unfamiliar with Port Authority, this map shows the wide variety of facilities that they own and operate across New York and New Jersey regions. They have the airports, JFK, Newark, LaGuardia, and a few others. The seaports, of course, the Trans-Hudson crossings, the George Washington Bridge, the Bayonne, the Lincoln and Holland tunnels, Port Authority bus terminal, and the George Washington bus station. There's the PATH train with 13 stations across New Jersey and Manhattan, and of course the World Trade Center complex in downtown Manhattan. And for perspective, the Port Authority has a capital plan budget of $37 billion over the next 10 years. And this doesn't include some of the private investments that are happening with the current JFK redevelopment efforts. And all told, that's about $50 billion over the next 10 years. So with a program this size and this large, sustainability is obviously very important. Everything that our group can do now, just by sheer scale, has the potential for a large net positive impact on sustainability and on the environment. So just a brief background on sustainability at Port Authority. Some sustainable policy started as early as 1993, but more recently in 2008, Port Authority expanded their environmental policy to address climate change. And this includes goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and increasing sustainability. Later in 2018, Port Authority was the first major transportation agency to sign on to the Paris Agreements. And Port Authority is unique in that it's a bi-state agency spanning obviously New York and New Jersey, and operates across many municipalities. In general, Port Authority will adhere to the local codes or the national standards depending on where a certain project is located. But Port Authority reserves the right to enhance regulations when necessary to adopt sort of a code plus policy. And this allows them to align with best practices that may go above and beyond what's only required by law. So in that vein of the code plus type of policy, PA enacted internal mandate for sustainability and resilience made by way of an administrative instruction, which is basically an executive order. And to support this mandate, the Port Authority formed the Resilience and Sustainable Design Group, which is where Josh and I sit. And this group operates as its own discipline within the engineering department and administers the following guidelines. They're the Sustainable Building Guidelines, which leverage the LEED credit system, the Sustainable Infrastructure Guidelines, which we'll dive into more as a custom set of credits, which in the future will leverage Envision. The Climate Resilient Guidelines leverages New York City panel on climate change projections to help inform methods for developing design flood elevations. And it also addresses increased precipitation and temperature factors during the future lives of design assets. And then finally, the Green Infrastructure Design Manual, which is being developed now for the first time. It's happening in parallel with the Sustainable Infrastructure Guidelines, and we'll do a quick plug for that near the end. So the Sustainable Infrastructure Guidelines that we have today was developed in 2011. This is probably around the same time that early Envision development was happening, and there may have even been some cross-pollination there. But the difference is that SIG hasn't been updated since 2011. So it consists of 50 custom credits across 7 different categories. And the guideline document itself consists of a manual which describes each credit, includes scoring metrics, case studies for each, and also includes an Excel-based checklist, the SIG checklist, that tracks credit achievement and compliance, and uses the familiar terminology of certified, silver, gold, and platinum for the different achievement levels for a project. And so the SIG will apply to almost all non-building projects that have significant scope. So some of the examples of common projects for Port Authority are listed here. We have airfield, new construction or reconstruction, bridge work, marine structures, roadways, parking lots, track work. And so all of these projects in general will have to meet some sort of minimum threshold of achievement in the SIG. Here's some screenshots of the SIG checklist that we mentioned. And the way this works is that if you look in the top right at number 1, at the start of a project, the user, who will usually be the lead engineer or lead architect, will select a relevant project type and select from a menu of supplemental scope types, such as landscape, exterior lighting. And once these selections are made, and if you look at number 2, the spreadsheet will automatically highlight credits that are applicable to that scope combination. And at this point, there's still some opportunity to add or remove credits as needed based on the specific scope of the project. And the user can then use the checkbox interface to select which credits they're going to target and achieve. And the spreadsheet then takes this to the third point, which is where it spits out the point total and your achievement for the project. And the way this works is that the lead engineer or architect will, or their consultant, will maintain this throughout the project, starting in the early pre-design stages and carry it through. And we'll also document the achievement of each credit and compliance as it goes along. So why does Port Authority need to update the SIG? Well, the obvious is because a lot has changed since 2011, and now there's an opportunity to align with some of the current best practices. And since we developed some of the credits in 2011, some of these have become the norm. So for example, some of the ones that cover sustainable construction practices have been incorporated to standard Division 1 clauses in the contract. So these credits are no longer really pushing the envelope as far as sustainability is concerned. So we want to update some of those. And then looking at historical utilization of some of these credits, we see that some are receiving too many points for a relatively small return on investment. So Port Authority definitely wants to adjust some of the scoring issues and inequities that happen, and like to iron some of those out. And so in general, there's also some gaps that need to be filled in, and a need to align with more updated Port Authority sustainability initiatives. And so the decision was made fairly early on to align the new SIG with Envision. And some of the reasons for that is because it responds to a lot of the issues that we mentioned in the previous slide. Envision reflects the current best practices for sustainable infrastructure. There's a robust and tested scoring system that's already been established. We can leverage, again, all the pre-established training modules, the templates and documents developed by ISI, And this eliminates the need for Port Authority to then have to update and maintain a custom system every so often. And the system is flexible and can be modified to suit Port Authority, and as this is evidenced by some of the other peer agencies in New York City and in LA. Many of those who are going to be presenting later have also adopted some form of Envision to their policies. So there's definitely some precedent for that. And so where are we right now with the update? We initiated the project in December to update the guidelines, and I'm leading it from the HDR side, but we also brought in a great team from Autocase to perform the actual implementation tasks, and these are shown on the right-hand side. I won't go through all of them, but in general, the early tasks have been to perform internal research, internal to Port Authority, which includes finding out what is Port Authority doing, how is it aligning with Envision already, helping to establish a current baseline achievement across all of the credits. So, and then we're asking, what can we be doing to improve this baseline? What incremental changes, what larger changes can we make to improve how we'll eventually be scored in using Envision down the road? And then we did some external research, which was reaching out to those peer agencies to see how they had adopted Envision, what are their lessons learned, and kind of combining all that information to help us with our transition. And then using this information, the idea is to evaluate the Envision version 3 credits and develop a menu of update scenarios or options that we'll review and then choose which options work the best for Port Authority to develop a final configuration for implementation. And the main ground rule going into this was that we wanted, of course, to leverage Envision version 3 framework, but we wanted to be flexible enough so that it works with all Port Authority projects and facilities. We saw earlier there's a wide variety of facilities, from airports to bridges to ports to roads to parking lots, and then across several different municipalities with different needs that we have to address. So there's a big need for flexibility in the system. And even within Port Authority, one of the trickier points of the update is that we sit in the engineering division, and that we have limited control of what happens up to project initiation. So with a lot of the planning that goes on before a project is selected, we don't have a lot of control over to that point. And then after the project is constructed, we currently don't have a lot of say in what happens with operations and maintenance either. So a big part of the early tasks were identifying these non-design, non-construction credits that have to do with the planning level and how, are you doing the right project type of questions. And so we identified those and interviewed these planning level groups at Port Authority to see, what are they already doing to contribute to Envision? What could they be doing in the future to improve? And a big part of the next steps will then be take those recommendations and introduce them to these groups to see how we can influence what they do as well. And so when it's all said and done, and we roll out, still planning on fall 2020 at this point, the final deliverable will look similar to what we have now, which is we'll have an updated guidance manual, new interactive SIG checklists that operates in a similar way, where the user will select a project scope of some sort, and the spreadsheet will spit out which credits are applicable based on these inputs. And another thing that we really want to focus on is how are we going to define how documentation is required? Because a lot of the projects at Port Authority are what we call state of good repair. And so some of them are smaller or limited scope. So how do you apply such a broad rating system to smaller projects or fast track projects with a very narrow scope, but still adding some sustainable value for what you're doing? So what we've done, again, to reiterate to date, one of the things that we did that I think was a good lesson learned was to develop a technical advisory group. And this group consists of members from other engineering disciplines who will be using the guidelines the most often in the future. And we just felt it was very important to get their feedback throughout the project, throughout the update, but also this will help to get their buy-in when we roll out the update in the future. And we also reviewed historic credit utilization to see which credits have been used most often in the past, which ones are being used least often in the past. And this helps give a kind of a profile, sustainability profile at Port Authority to see how how is sustainability most often defined in a project of different types historically. And again, we interviewed these planning level non-design stakeholders to find out what they're doing to meet Envision. And then after the assessments, we'll be recommending ways they can incrementally update their processes to maximize their sustainable return on investment. And we also interviewed peer agencies who have implemented Envision at some level and just gained a wealth of knowledge from them. So we'd like to thank the LA County Department of Public Works, who Yoon Sim will be talking later, New York City DEP, and Angelo, he has a presentation later as well, and also Sophia Zuba-Buehler-Yafar at New York City Department of Design and Construction. Just thank you for sharing your programs and all of your lessons learned with our team, and it's going to help us a lot moving forward. So going into the Envision credit assessment, which is a big part of what we've done so far, this is the process we went through to establish Port Authority's baseline Envision credit achievement. So what is the business as usual case right now? And so we and the Autocase team went through all the credits and to evaluate how the PA's current procedures currently stack up to what the criteria are in the credits. So what the team did then was recommending low-hanging goals that could be easy wins. So this could be something that Port Authority is already doing, but maybe just not documenting quite enough, or maybe they're just a half step away from getting to the next level of achievement. They're very close to getting there. They need a little bump in the right direction. So we have those low-hanging goals, and then we have what we call stretch goals, which will take more effort, will take more time, and they more than likely involve some of these external groups outside of the engineering division, so planning level or O&M level, and anything that requires a level of coordination will just take more time and effort by nature. So we identify these as stretch goals, ones we still have in mind to accomplish later, but maybe not for the first round of improvements. And the way that we normalize these for comparison and for prioritization is we developed a very simple formula based on probability, which is what's the likelihood that a credit will be applicable and pursued at Port Authority, multiplied by the effort. How easy is this to implement? And this is basically that low-hanging versus stretch goal. And then multiply that by the impact, which is what is the incremental Envision score that we would receive by making these changes. So, for example, at the bottom of the screen, we have credit NW 2.2, which is managed stormwater. And we had assumed that about 75% of Port Authority projects would involve, this credit would be applicable to those. So it involves some level of stormwater management. The achievement level that the low-hanging goal is striving towards is superior, and that would gain us 9 additional points above our current baseline. The criteria for this credit we'd have to incorporate is A, B, and C as per ISI's manual, and then the resultant score from multiplying those factors together is a 6.75. You see on the right. So, this is an example table of once we do this evaluation, what this will look like across the board with the list of normalized recommendations. And there's a disclaimer that this is still being finalized, so this is a draft only that we're using kind of to demonstrate. So this may not actually reflect what improvements will be made at Port Authority moving forward. But this table, you can see that the credits are ordered based on the rating in the far right column. And to the left of that, you can see the level of achievement that we're trying to gain for each of these recommendations, and then the applicability factor, which no surprise that the credits that are most applicable are the ones that scored the highest. So if these recommendations hold, some takeaways from this exercise, one thing that Port Authority will want to look at is maybe updating the climate resilience guidelines, because the CR credits, climate resilience credits are number 1, number 2, you have CR 2.4, we have 3 of them in the top 5. So it may take looking back at the CRG and making some minor updates to really improve our Envision score for those. And otherwise, it's just changing what's in the engineering division's control. And some of the more long-term challenges will be influenced and change at those planning and O&M levels. But even then, in orange, you can see LD 2.1, Established Sustainability Management Plan. This was a stretch goal that was assumed to be a longer term goal, but because it would get us such a higher rating by implementing it, it boosted to the top. So the score is still very high, even though it would take more effort and more time to achieve. And so in general, this is the kind of table that we're going to use as a result of the assessment to help inform what improvements we need to make internally as we transition away from our custom system to the Envision system. So for next steps, we're going to finalize the assessment that we just went over from the previous slide, and document the recommendations both internally at the engineering division level, and then document maybe in an MOU or memo for the planning level groups at Port Authority, the O&M groups, to say, here are some things that if you're updating your processes already anyway, that you could do to really help your sustainability. So here's some things to consider when you're looking and maybe reevaluating what you're doing with your group. And we're also developing right now the update scenarios, which these basically include a menu of options for various decision points. And so we'll review and answer these questions. And some of these options are, how closely are we going to follow ISI documentation procedures? How much may we try to streamline those? Which are we going to mandate certain achievement levels for certain credits? Will we modify the scoring system based on Port Authority's applicability for certain credits? How often are we going to self-assess to kind of fast track the sustainability review? And how often and when would we submit to ISI for full review of a project? These are all kind of questions that we're going to have to ask ourselves and answer during the scenario development. And so once that's finalized, we'll develop draft and final update packages, which will include the manual, will include the custom SIG spreadsheets and the checklists, and some case study documents and some quick guides and some quick manual, reference manuals, things like that. Roll out the final update packages with the tag group involved, to get everyone on board to try to test the new system, find any small tweaks that can be made, provide education, training. One of the lessons we learned from the peer agencies was that it's very important to get a lot of folks at your agencies certified in Envision. It helps them understand the process. They get more buy-in. They feel more obligated to want to use the credits, to want to incorporate them into their projects. And then any of these procedural updates agency-wide that we had identified previously, trying to adopt those into the other agencies. And then also, as we mentioned before, at the same time, there's this green infrastructure design manual that's also being produced. So we also want to roll that out at around the same time as the sustainable infrastructure guideline update. And so just a quick plug on that document. This is again, we're developing in parallel with the SIG update. This manual will basically be a reference, so Port Authority disciplines can help guide them with the siting, evaluation, selection, design, maintenance of green infrastructure. And why the SIG guidelines are mandatory, this manual for now will just be a resource to start out. This is the first time that something like this is developed at Port Authority. So this will be a resource which the various disciplines and consultants can reference, so they can easily implement GI and consistently implement GI across their projects. Right now, there's some differences. Every time there's a new GI project, things are maybe done a little differently. So we're really trying to amass that past knowledge and have one place that they can go to help with some of these things. And it'll also help align with the SIG update. And specifically, we're baking in some of the Envision credits that'll help with the achievement for SIG. And you can see NW 2.2, 2.3, 3.4, and 3.2 are some that we've targeted that we're going to bake into the process, so they're also meeting these credits as they're designing their green infrastructure for their projects. And again, the rollout will be in parallel with SIG, which is still scheduled right now for the fall of 2020. So with that, thanks for everyone for calling in the sessions. We're looking forward to hearing from the other speakers as well, and then answering any questions that you have at the end. So again, thanks.
Thank you, Derek. That was a great presentation, and we do have a list of questions that have rolled in. I think our plan is to proceed with Yun's presentation, and then we'll have time set aside for questions for both Derek and Yun. So for those of you who have been submitting questions through the chat, thank you very much. We're recording those, and we'll ask Derek and Yun after Yun's presentation. So Yun, if you're ready and would like to begin with your presentation, take it away.
Sure, thank you. Good morning from California. Thank you, ISI, for letting me speak at 7 o'clock in the morning in Western time. I believe that's the earliest.
Sorry, Yun.
I think this is the earliest time I ever spoke. But great. If you joined from the Pacific time zone at 7 o'clock in the morning, I really appreciate your commitment to sustainable infrastructure. I assume most of the audience is somewhat familiar with Envision, but if you have wondered how infrastructure owners truly value Envision, how they use it besides pursuing Envision awards, or does it make any realistic difference in everyday infrastructure operations, or whether the high-level management truly supports it. If you have those questions, this presentation may help you answer them. Next, please. Let me start with a brief description of our areas. The county is over 4,700 square miles and home to 10 million residents. This means about a quarter of California populations, or 1 in 33 US population lives in LA County. The county is made up of 88 cities and over 140 unincorporated communities. That means 88 different city governments with their own public works and their own priorities for infrastructure improvements. Next, please. Los Angeles County Public Works is the largest public works agencies in the nation, with an annual operating budget of over $3 billion and close to 4,000 employees. The agency was formed in 1985 when County Engineer's Office was combined with the Road Department and County Flood Control District. Public Works is responsible for a wide range of regional infrastructures and services that fall within 6 core service areas as shown in the slide. Some of our infrastructure includes 14 dams, 27 spreading grounds, over 3,000 miles of storm drain system, 533 bridges, and over 3,000 miles of county roadways. Next, please. The county as a whole, and LA County Public Works in particular, has always placed a high value on sustainability. Investing in sustainability is one of the key focus areas of our strategic plan, which sets the direction for our entire agency. Our administration is committed to community-based infrastructure planning to provide the most sustainable programs, services, and infrastructure to our communities. Next, please. Sustainability is a state as well as a value. Having said that, let me start with how Public Works defines sustainability. To some folks, maybe I'm preaching to the choir, but some of you have seen this diagram with the 3 overlapping concentric circles representing environmental, social, and economical pillars. The key is to ensure our efforts address all 3 at the same time, not focusing on one while compromising the other 2, which often happens. For example, sole focus on the environmental aspect often leads to what is known as greenwashing. This is my reminder to my team all the time when developing projects or programs. Next, please. Now, how do we apply that to infrastructure management? We believe sustainable infrastructure should be environmentally protective and is directly aligned with and supports the community's needs by creating socioeconomic co-benefits and is an efficiently functioning quote-unquote system that enables cost savings. This new approach helps avoid a piecemeal approach in infrastructure planning and therefore manage infrastructure as a one integrated system that is directly connected with a community and meets the complex expectations for modern infrastructure. Next, please. Public Works has been leading regional efforts to develop sustainable infrastructure in LA region. When ISI was first formed in 2010 and subsequently produced the first draft version of Envision in 2011, Public Works immediately joined ISI and participated in further development of Envision. After having rated some projects and seeing the benefits as a vehicle to implement sustainable infrastructure, we worked closely with the County Board of Supervisors to adopt Envision as a standard for all county infrastructure projects. In August 2016, the board approved, not yet, sorry. In August 2016, the board approved a motion that expands the use of Envision beyond public works to all county departments that have infrastructure projects. It was the county's second sustainability standard since LEED in 2007. As part of this action, the board directed Public Works to develop a consistent sustainability language using Envision across the LA region by coordinating with the other agencies such as LA City and LA Metro. The board also directed us to reach out and make impact on private sectors, including construction and small business community. Next, please. We talked about how we define sustainable infrastructure as well as the Envision as a vehicle to implement it. But to make implementation actionable, it really begins with training. As of today, we have 264 EMBSPs in our agency. In the past, we have used ISI's online training program, but because there's such a high demand, we also offer in-person training opportunities with an ISI certified trainer. In November 2019, ISI staff hosted an in-person training at Public Works. Our training session had about 45 attendees, so we look forward to increasing our EMBSPs at Public Works in 2020 through this option. Furthermore, we expanded a training beyond Public Works staff to provide training to other county departments and also consultants who work with the Public Works. To date, total 81 people were trained outside of our agency. Next, please. As stated before, Public Works has been involved with ISI since 2011, but we really began extensively rating projects since 2013. To date, we've self-rated over 200 projects by Envision credentialed staff. Some of the projects rated retroactively, meaning that they did not use Envision in planning phases. But by doing so, we still have opportunity to get a sense of where our typical projects stand, which helps us evaluate our existing practice for future improvement. Of total rated, 40% projects were rated below the verified level, which means 60% of projects qualify for an award level from verified to platinum. I'll let you see in the slide a specific percentage breakdown among those. Next, please. Now, Envision being the county standard, I'll talk about how we are using Envision to transform the way that we deliver our infrastructure. Sustainable infrastructure can only be achieved when sustainability principles are implemented in all phases of infrastructure planning. And we are using Envision to lead such an institutional changes. In the next few slides, I'll go through how the changes can be implemented in planning, contracting, delivery, and maintenance phases. Next, please. Infrastructure as a backbone that supports community life needs to be planned as a regional system, not as one plan individually at each city. Each municipal government has its own infrastructure priorities based on community needs and political agenda. And it's often demonstrated in the way they plan and design the infrastructure in a uniquely different way. This often leads to a fragmented infrastructure practice. Let's see the picture in the slide. I took this picture while I was biking. You may notice my dedicated bike lane disappears after the intersection in front of me. This often happens numerous times within the same arterial street when passing through multiple cities. Sometimes it happens within the same city. This could make biking in this region unreliable as an independent mode of transportation, no matter how much we invest on bikeways. Communities' social and economic needs are at a regional scale in nature. and all cities within the region need to work together to provide a consistent system of infrastructure to truly function as a backbone. Next, please. Studies have said that the more than 60% of material procurement in the US is through the institutional procurement, such as corporations, schools, and governments. This means the power of institutional procurement can move the entire industry's supply chain. In the infrastructure sector, this includes design and construction services or material purchase for day-to-day maintenance. As I mentioned, Public Works sometimes uses contractors to assist with the project designs. We saw this as an opportunity to integrate Envision use and rating as a deliverable by consultants. So our internal working group developed a specific languages and RFPs that require consultants to have EMV-SP credential staff on their team and experience using Envision. Next, please. As part of incorporating Envision into our delivery process, we've developed what we refer to as Sustainable Infrastructure Design Guideline. Following Derek, I'll call it SIG from this point on. The SIG utilize and integrate sustainable best practices and design criteria by reinterpreting Envision credits into 8 specific categories that are unique to public works operations. You can see those 8 at the bottom of this slide. The SIG help designers and conceptualize and decide the most sustainable design options. The guidelines were developed with Envision in mind, but also include features from LEED and California Green Building Code, as well as other existing design guidelines. Designing a project following the steps and elements in the guidelines will automatically implement sustainability principles of Envision, leading to a high level Envision rating, such as silver or higher. Like New York Port Authority's case, our SIG is due for update, primarily due to a recent Envision update to version 3. Thank you, ISI, for making us update our SIG. Okay, next, please. Contrary to common perception, the public agency's main work is not necessarily building new infrastructure every day, but repairing and rehabbing existing ones on a daily basis. This is especially true in highly urbanized areas like LA region, where most of the critical infrastructure has already been built. So implementing sustainable practices at a program level is a key to institutionalizing sustainability principles in our day-to-day operations to ultimately reach the point of sustainability as a second nature. Next, please. Once the Envision County standard was approved, we wanted to look at ways to expand the use of Envision within our own agency. This has led to the development of an internal working group called Envision Planning Team, which is made up of representatives from each of our business branches. The efforts of Envision Planning Team includes finding ways to integrate and expand the Envision at each business branch in its own protocol and project delivery process. Like you can imagine by now, to us, Envision is more than just an award. The true value is framework that allows us to discuss and measure sustainability across all range of our services, from capital improvement projects with a full application of Envision to routine improvement projects, such as repair and maintenance activities with a limited scale programmatic approach. I'll show you some of the examples in the next slides. Next, please. So this table represents one sample project breakdown for our waterworks operations. If you look at closely on your left-hand side, you'll see we divide the projects into 2 main categories called significant and routine. The larger, more significant projects require full range of project delivery process and will have Envision applied through the project process. The smaller, more routine projects don't need as much conceptual design work. However, we wanted to find a way that we could still make these projects as sustainable as possible without increasing the cost. So we identify them as good candidates for a programmatic approach. Next, please. This slide illustrates how Envision is applied to significant projects through the help of SIG, Sustainable Infrastructure Guideline. The left-hand side column shows the SIG's evaluation checklist as a reinterpretation of Envision credits. The two pie charts on the right-hand side illustrate how project is scored within SIG and how that scoring is translated into Envision rating. So when following these guidelines, a typical project would rate around a silver Envision rating, and it is up to the design team to decide if they should pursue additional sustainability measures. Next, please. So this is for the routine projects. So not all projects have sufficient components applicable to a range of Envision credits, and that's not a bad thing. Examples of these type of projects are routine maintenance projects. In this case, the programmatic rating establishes the minimum threshold the project should achieve based on current practices. We can use this information to help indicate areas to improve our sustainable practices. This table represents a sample, a programmatic rating of our pavement preservation program. Our road maintenance group in transportation branch identified all applicable Envision credits that our pavement preservation projects should be able to achieve. Next, please. But this is another example for our effort to institutionalize Envision. This slide shows a snapshot of our project management system called PIW. We coordinated with the ISI to connect our system directly to Envision and database to create Envision dashboards within PIW. The red circled is a sustainability tab that was added for this purpose. The dashboards are designed to help track Envision rating through the life of a project delivery from concept, final design, and post-construction phases. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, here you go. I think this is the last slide. So here are some quick takeaways from my presentation. First, we would like to emphasize that developing a sustainable infrastructure involves institutional level changes that involves all phases and components of infrastructure delivery. And Envision has been the key vehicle to enable that. Use of agency or company-wide policies and programs will expedite these changes. A dedicated analytical tools, such as design guidelines and project database, will further help guide and track the progress and identify areas for improvement. And lastly, we recommend working with other agencies and infrastructure partners in the region to ensure and enhance the socioeconomic benefits that infrastructure should bring as a system. Since much of its new civil infrastructure is nowadays being built by private sectors as part of new land development, close partnership with the private sector is the key. With that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Yun. That was a great presentation. Thank you again also to Derek. So we do have a long list of questions that people have submitted. I just want to mention to people, if we don't have enough time to get through all of the questions right now before the next series of speakers, we will also extend the webinar a few minutes after 12 o'clock Eastern to answer questions. If somebody's questions don't get answered even within that time, ISI will work with the speakers to get written responses and send them out. So we will make sure that all the questions do get addressed. But starting it off, Derek, to go back to you, we received several questions that I'll try to group together related to whether economics or financial analysis played a part in when you were weighing Envision against the sustainable infrastructure guideline credits. So essentially, did evaluation of costs versus impact play a role? Did you look at did you weigh costs and life cycle performance? And then did that have any kind of impact in terms of implementing Envision when you were looking at the economics?
Yeah, it's a great question. In general, benefit cost analyses and life cycle costs are included in many of the larger Port Authority projects by policy. When we evaluated the credits for now, it was more of a feasibility question. So it was, how much leverage does the engineering division have to make this change? How often will a credit be applicable? And what ability do we have to influence this change being made across Port Authority? So for now, it was just, is it feasible to include this credit, to mandate this credit in a project? And then moving forward, then once we go into the scenarios and the actual manual, there will be more of a cost implication. And that'll also be part of the process for the different projects, because we'll give them a list of available credits, but then it'll be up to the project team to really select which credits make the most sense for that project. And of course, as I mentioned, these types of assessments are the guidelines are well written by the economics group at Port Authority, and so they will follow BCA's and LCCA's life cycle cost assessments to make those decisions during design. So for now, no, but it will be a part of the process moving, once during the project stage.
Great, thank you. Jan, a question for you. Having created the sustainability office within LA DPW, someone was asking, what do you think is the smallest critical size of an engineering or public works office staffing that can do this kind of standard setting sustainability planning? And do you think small communities should band together, or should they just say adopt LA's guidelines or the Port Authority's guidelines?
Good question. With respect to the size question of the sustainability office, I think we always try to keep our sustainability office small enough, but skilled, with a well-skilled staff. I'm saying that because if the sustainability office gets too big, and then oftentimes that office will be assigned to everyone's work. So that the reconnaissance approach we took here at Public Works is we kept our office relatively small compared to other business group, yet we have a mechanism to reach out to entire business unit. That's what we call Sustainability Council. So we have a sustainability office that basically orchestrates the entire agency sustainability efforts, but we also created what we call Sustainability Council. That actually is that's a 10-member council that has a representative from each business unit, so that we will be able to work closely with those representatives to reach out to the entire the agencies. So that's the consensus approach that we took, so that because our work is truly a change, making changes, leading the change. So rather than we do everyone's work, we actually help make changes at business units. That's the approach we took. Using the LA guideline or New York Port Authority's guideline, I think that's a good approach, but I think the ports, New York's and then ours guidelines are somewhat specific to our own operations. So I think that is a great start for everyone to use, and then we are happy to share ours. It's basically consists of one Excel sheet and one PDF. It's outdated, like I said, needs to be updated to Envision version 3, but I think I recommend using it as a template. But I think I wish that there was a lot more general template type of guideline that ISI can actually develop for everyone's use. I think that would be more ideal situation.
Great, Jan. I don't know if you somehow read the notes, but you answered 3 questions already in that response. So I guess someone had asked about what does the Envision planning team at LA County look like? And I think you've addressed that. And
Yeah.
then someone else had asked whether these sustainable infrastructure guidelines were public documents, and I think you answered that. So thank you. You did 3 in 1. Going back to Derek, maybe someone did ask similar questions, I think along those lines of, one, whether the Port Authority guidelines are public documents or will be public documents in this case. And then a question about how sustainability is integrated into the overall structure of the operations. Is it more of a sustainability team, as Yun kind of mentioned, that's responsible for making change, or is sustainability integrated throughout the entire engineering department, or perhaps beyond? I think in the case of LA, sorry, Yun, I misstepped, because I think LA has kind of a both approach. You have the sustainability team, but as you mentioned, you also have 200 ENVSPs on staff, so it is also a broad approach. But anyway, Derek, could you speak a little bit to the Port Authority's approach?
Yeah, and I'll say from the Port Authority side, the Resilience and Sustainable Design Group is 4 permanent staff and 2 on-site consultants, and that's for a 10-year capital plan of $37 billion. So it can be done with a smaller team, and this team does an incredible amount of work, and I'm always kind of in awe with what they can accomplish for their size. So it can be done. I think they'd be the first to say that they could use a few more, but it is possible to do this with a smaller group. And the way that it works with Port Authority is that the engineering division consists of about a dozen or so different disciplines. So you have structural, civil, all the usual suspects, and then resilience and sustainable design. The group that we sit in is its own engineering discipline. So we'll be at the table from once the project is initiated by those planning level agency departments and moves to the engineering division for actual implementation. They'll be involved. The RSD group will be involved in all aspects of the project. So we will be the ones kind of pushing the project manager or the lead engineer to fill out their sustainable checklists, to implement any climate resilience into the project. We'll be able to review all of the pre-design and design milestones. So we're really at the table the full, the entire way. So we'll always be, have a voice in the design.
Great, thank you. And then I have one more question that I think would apply to both of you, and then we'll move on to our next panel. And as I mentioned, we will, if we have time at the end, revisit some of these questions that we didn't get to ask. But for both of you, someone had asked, if you could expand more on the benefits you're seeing of updating the sustainable infrastructure guidelines based off of Envision versus, for example, just using Envision as a standalone tool. They continue, do the guidelines include additional tools to streamline the Envision process for the different project types or users that you've mentioned?
Yeah, I can jump in first. The reason that Port Authority chose Envision was because of its flexibility and for the fact that we don't have to continue to maintain and update a custom system. And the reason that we won't just adopt Envision as it is because I think as Yoon mentioned that there's so many specific projects and there are these smaller business as usual projects that we call state of good repair that if we tried to score these across the full spectrum of credits, we just wouldn't score very highly. And it would take a lot of effort for a project that has a relatively small budget, small scope, maybe a quick timeline. So we want the ability to pick and choose the credits that will really give us the most return on sustainable investment and the most bang for our buck. And so we want to use a pre-existing industry standard set of credits, but then apply those to a wide range of sizes and types of projects across different facilities, across different states. And so we're using it, but we're also customizing it a little bit just to add that flexibility.
I definitely second that. When we first started using Envision since 2013, after having so many staff credentialed, having them learn Envision, we quickly realized that their knowledge is not necessarily directly transferred to their workstation in their day-to-day design task. We quickly saw the gap. So that's what we needed, a more of the, I call it cookbook in the past, or cookbook, how we can bring high-level Envision concept into day-to-day operations. So that's why we needed the Sustainable Infrastructure Guideline, or SIG. And that really helped us making those institutional changes that I mentioned. So it's just like our day-to-day workbook. So I think I really saw the benefit of having it. Like Derek mentioned, some of those routine projects or repair projects that would not get fully benefited from the full rating practice could also get benefit from this, from SIG, in making small changes here and there to entirely change their practices as a whole. So we definitely saw the value of it, and we continue update our SIG as Envision gets updated. And Envision version 3 had some major good changes, including the economic elements. So we will go ahead and update our SIG to reflect those good changes that ISI made.
Great, thank you both again. Derek, just to close out on an anecdote, in Derek's presentation, he mentioned, whether there was cross-pollination between Envision and the original Port Authority guidelines. I can say I remember very vividly that there was. So the Port Authority Sustainable Infrastructure Guidelines predated Envision. They were one of the first sustainable infrastructure guidelines that we were aware of. And when we crafted the original version of Envision, it was a source of inspiration for us to look at the Port Authority's work. And so there was definitely some cross-pollination of the Port Authority's guidelines influencing the original creation of Envision. And so it's a wonderful story that then LA County was an earlier adopter of Envision once it was released. And now we've come full circle, and the Port Authority is looking to Envision version 3. And as you mentioned, Derek has been getting help from LA County, from their experience, and learning to grow into their new sustainable infrastructure guidelines. So I really just appreciate all of that. It's essentially why ISI exists. Our mission, what we really hope to achieve, is exactly this type of sharing of information and experiences to make sure that all agencies around the United States and Canada and the world have access to the best practices and learning that everyone else is doing. So thank you very much. This was a great panel that Lindsay put together. I really appreciate your presentations. With that, we'll move on. I do apologize to anyone whose questions we didn't get to, but as I said, we'll try to get those answered. Coming up next, we have a great lineup. So beginning with Laureana Marciante. Laureana has almost 2 decades of experience in the urban built environment at the intersection of transportation innovation and sustainable development. Laureana's experience ranges from large transportation infrastructure projects to commercial real estate development. Recently, she was the Sustainable Transportation Lead within the Paul G. Allen Climate and Energy Philanthropic Portfolio, focused on reducing greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. She oversaw the Smart City Challenge Initiative, a $50 million partnership with the U.S. Department of Transportation. At HNTB, Laureana is leading teams working towards integrating emergent transportation technologies to help public agencies solve transportation challenges, including SANDAG's 5 Big Moves Regional Transportation Plan in San Diego, SFCTA's Treasure Island AV pilot in San Francisco, and the City of Seattle's Transportation Technology Roadmap. We'll also be joined by Angelo Falabella. Angelo began his career as a sustainability analyst for the New York City Department of Environmental Protection in 2019. In this role, he works to incorporate sustainability into engineering designs for water and wastewater capital projects. He's actively engaged with over 50 capital projects in various stages of the design lifecycle as the primary sustainability analyst, ranging from reservoir and dam upgrades, drinking water tunnels and shafts, wastewater pumping stations, combined sewer overflow reduction projects, and wastewater resources recovery facility upgrades. This includes 5 projects still in the process of Envision verification under version 2, and many more anticipated for version 3. Angelo is an Envision sustainability professional and holds a BE in environmental engineering and an MS in sustainability management from Stevens Institute of Technology. So thank you both again for joining us today, and we'll begin the presentations with Loriana.
Thank you, Anthony. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Let me share my screen here. Okay. Get situated here. Good morning, everyone. At least it's morning to me. All right. So I'm going to speak today a little bit about sustainable transportation. And specifically, I'm going to talk about the San Diego Association of Governments, SANDAG, their regional transportation plan, which we've been working on for the last, since July at HNTB. So I am a consultant. I work for HNTB. My title is Senior Emerging Mobility Solutions Engineer. I'm part of the Intelligent Transportation Systems team, which we're actually rebranding Intelligent Transportation and Emerging Mobility Solutions. And we do a lot of work with agencies on how technology can advance, how we can advance technology to meet the needs of the transportation system. I joined this team. I am not an ITS engineer, but I joined this team because I have learned over the years that technology is one of the most promising pathways to arrive at a sustainable future at the moment. And so I'm very interested in the intersection between technology and how we can drive sustainable future. So today, let's see if I can move along. Here we go. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about sustainable transportation and then jump right into SANDAG 5 Big Moves, what it took to create the vision, and then the actual concepts where they stand. So about sustainable transportation. So I think everyone on the call is very familiar with the general definition of sustainability, people, planet, profits, or environmental, social, and essentially fiscal in the public sector. So in transportation, I like to define it in this way. It's a helpful framework that I use. So air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, they're obviously environmental factor, but we all understand how vehicle emissions affect air quality. And for a very long time, these have been regulated, not to great success yet, but there has been progress. And we now understand those same emissions are the cause of climate change. Greenhouse gas emissions, therefore, should be regulated as well in vehicle emissions. Now, that is an element in and of itself because there's such a focus on transportation to reduce vehicle emissions. But we also have to think about the overall ecosystem impact of our transportation system. And this is where we get more into land use and the amount of previous pavements that we have, what ecosystems we're disrupting, natural ecosystems that we're disrupting, and our impact on the general natural environment. So in many ways, we have learned over the years that sprawl is not beneficial to our ecosystems and is taking away valuable resources. And a lot of the transportation planning effort it's also got to do with thinking about more sustainable ways of organizing ourselves and to connect each other. And then the people side of sustainability, I like to think of it as equity. And we definitely want a transportation system that works for everyone. And so there's been a lot of focus on how do we make sure that our transportation system doesn't leave anyone behind, anyone who doesn't own a car, anyone who has a disability, et cetera. We have some regulations like the ADA regulations, American for Disabilities Act, that can help, but it's also very important for local communities to really plan around everyone that needs to use and uses the transportation system. Now, one of the things that I didn't point out in and of itself is safety. Safety is also one of the first priorities for transportation planners, and to look at how do you ensure that lives are not taken. From my perspective, a sustainable transportation system cannot be a system upon which essentially where there are fatalities and injuries consistently. So to me, a sustainable transportation system should also protect the safety of people. It's not, I didn't explicitly call it out because it is such an important topic that it usually has a priority in and of itself. And then lastly, when we think about the economic impact of sustainable transportation, in terms of public process, I like to think about fiscal responsibility. We really need to understand other presenters that, as you call it, the life cycle analysis. We have to make sure that whatever we build can be sustained, maintained, and is not really dragging our economy down through the investments that we need to make over the years to a transportation system. So life cycle analysis, understanding what we're committing ourselves to when we plan transportation infrastructure is critically important. So now I'm going to move into the 5 big moves. So here is a crowded slide. On the left, I put a little bit of the background of this project, and on the right is the actual 5 big moves. I'm going to start with SANDAG. San Diego Association of Governments is the metropolitan planning organization for the greater San Diego region. So San Diego has 18 cities in the San Diego County. A metropolitan planning organization has the responsibility to plan for the region's transportation system. This particular metropolitan MPO has the benefit that it receives the sales tax for transportation funding, so they have their own funding stream. So San Diego Forward is the regional transportation plan, which really lays out the infrastructure investments through 2050. And really the history about this is there was supposed to be a long-range transportation plan completed. I believe it was 2018 or 2020 perhaps. But as they were planning, what ended up happening is California SB 375 was passed many years ago, requires MPOs to demonstrate how development patterns and the transportation network, policies and programs can work together to achieve, and this is the new element, 19% greenhouse gas emissions for cars and light trucks by 2035. Now, this 19% greenhouse gas emissions was established in 2018 by the California Air Resource Board. So it was a more stringent target set by new science, essentially, mission through the National Climate Assessment. And so this caused, essentially, when they did the regional planning, their transportation system out to 2035 did not meet this requirement. And the SB 375 really requires to focus. You can't meet it through assumptions on change of electric, essentially uptake of electric vehicles. You can't meet it that way. It's really about reductions of VMT, vehicle miles traveled. And so the MPO was by necessity thrown into envisioning what kind of a system might actually reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and technology became an imperative component to really achieve our sustainability objectives. And so SANDAG came up with these 5 big moves, and we have a complete corridors, optimizing roadways. Transit LEAP is really a surge in transit options. The transit system is really not, it does not serve the public well. It's option of last resort in San Diego, which is a sprawling region, and they wanted to make significant investments in transit so that it can better compete with the private automobile. Mobility hubs is to create those areas where people can concentrate, transfer points, ideally also to create some density to support the transit network. Flexible fleets is a new concept where you might have ease of sharing, essentially. So you might think about this as ride-hailing, ride-sharing, even carpools or van pools, micro-mobility such as bike share, scooters. And so they're actively trying to understand ways that these flexible fleets can be part of the transportation system, a crucial part of meeting greenhouse gas emissions by reducing vehicle miles traveled, particularly short trips is where this is most promising. And then the underlying element that will make everything work is Next OS, or a new operating system, where the MPO will set standards and protocols to ensure that that entire system, the entire transportation experience is seamless, from payment to reservations to ensuring system reliability, and even congestion and management, and ensuring pricing as well, making sure that it's appropriately priced to make the system run effectively. So those are the general 5 big moves. And so what we've gone about now, we're in the process of developing this network, and I'm going to be somewhat limited in what I can share with you because the final network is still being tweaked, and due to coronavirus, there's been some cancellations on board updates. So it hasn't been released yet. It's slated for April 24th to be shared with the board. So until it's shared with the board, I am somewhat limited in what I can share with you in detail. But the overall concept has been planning through sort of data-driven planning is what we would call it. So we know that there's going to be 20% increase in population from 2019 to 2050. So we're planning for that increase. And right now, vehicles miles traveled is an increase of 24%. Now that approximately with calculations with the travel demand models, those 24% really increases greenhouse gas emissions approximately by the same amount. So we need to reduce vehicle miles traveled in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So the way we go about it, one of 3 trips are for work or work-related. And so most of these trips are consistent, they're mandatory, they have an average commute of 12.2 miles in the San Diego region. So they decided to focus, the agency decided to focus on the commute trips because at the time it was thought to be some of the easiest ways that we can shift vehicle miles traveled to other modes. It's consistent trips, people do it every day. It's easier to shift behavior in that sector. And also it's trips that have to be taken. They are not optional. So we need to solve for those commutes, at least until COVID-19. There might be changes underway. So connecting population and employment, this is where we started. We looked at where people live, which is fairly spread out in the San Diego region, as you can see, and there are some large spaces that are very, very sparsely populated. And then we also looked at employment centers. Most of the employment centers, a lot of the employment centers in San Diego are suburban employment centers, and so they're very far apart. So if you start to look at in GIS, how do we start connecting people from where they live to where they work? And we actually paired this. We have origin and destination, OD pairs, where we look at where people live and where they work at the moment based on census responses. And so you can start to see how difficult it might be to resolve this transportation system simply with a transit solution. So this is where the other elements, such as flexible fleets and next operating system, becomes really important. Now, I can't really share with you a lot of the new maps. They're still being tweaked and they haven't been released. But what this evolved into was now some specific investments in high-speed transit lines. There's going to be a lot of investments in rapid ride true BRT. They currently have some BRT, but it's not essentially the really rapid bus. So much more rapid transit, and you'll see some concepts of how technology can support this in the future when I get to the concepts section. And I also wanted to, there was a lot of outreach done as well during this process. Usually our transportation system is traditionally planned from the bottom up. Generally, cities look at growth projections that they have through land use projections, and they make their own choices about transportation systems, and those transportation lists and wish lists go up to the metropolitan planning organization that creates a regional vision. So it's really bottoms up, and our process somewhat disrupts this because it's looking at regional data and trying to better inform also land use practices. It's a little bit in the other direction. So it's very important to try to really understand, use new techniques to reach out to the community when doing this type of planning. So we went out and did human-centered design, and some of you might know it as design thinking, but it's really focus groups, intercept interviews, and resident focus groups that really to start to understand what are the barriers, the core barriers of people in transportation. And you can imagine that a lot of this research yielded some inconsistencies where people believe that a transit system should be for everyone, but also feel like the system is unsafe. And here are some of the responses. This is very interesting. So safety and security was a big factor. Reliability and speed. In San Diego, most transit trips will take twice as long than an automobile. So most people don't take it because of the time and also not reliable. An incomplete transit network, there are not really, it can be very circuitous as you try to reach all areas with one line, with one route. And then it's really inadequate for people who are transit dependent. Some more, like school bus services. We have unsafe biking conditions were also called out. Micromobility infrastructure and regulations. We have been playing around in this country with micromobility for the last 5 years at least, but we really haven't thought through how our infrastructure can serve these micromobility solutions, the new technological solutions, and they are a barrier, they are a safety constraint, a safety concern if you don't have the appropriate infrastructure for people to be safe and to store them adequately. So to me, infrastructure is a huge piece of making sure micromobility works, which can take on the short trips in many cases. And really everybody's used to planning their lives around traffic, and so travel behavior is also gets informed by how we feel traffic is going to be. I like to think about, I come from Costa Rica, and in our traffic jams, it might take us, let's say, an hour to travel a mile in peak time. And so you experience distance differently by the speed that you can travel, and that has both good and bad consequences, of course. So without further ado, that is a lot of information. We've done a lot of analysis as well. I wanted to mention there's been a lot of performance measures part of the reason that it's important to think about how do we think about the priorities, what are the things that we want to prioritize in a sustainable transportation system, it's because what do we measure? That's how we guide our measurement system. And so this long-range regional plan will measure how the greenhouse gas emissions is a key metric, vehicle miles traveled is a key metric. We also look at incidence of crash statistics, which are correlated by my vehicle miles traveled and highway infrastructure conditions. We look at whether the system will serve communities of concern, where they live, people with lower incomes, racial disparities, or age is also a factor when you're looking at communities of concern. And so there are many elements that will be measured and evaluated, and data is being used to prioritize certain systems. But to show you a little bit of what the future might look like, here is a complete corridor concept, a highway concept. So you can see here, the complete corridor concept is sort of like an envelope. Is how can we make sure that everything functions in an overall system? And I'm going to start highlighting some of these elements. We can see the active transportation here, so making sure that you have appropriate connections, sidewalks, and walking experience to reach this connection point, and also that you have active transportation network connected to the overall network, that it works alongside it is a crucial point. And then we can look at the transit, and so we can see high quality rail, high speed rail essentially. And also we're thinking about bus rapid transit, BRT, and how might this look like in 2050, a managed lane, a dedicated lane for bus rapid transit with vehicles that are actually platooning. So you can have a flexible train system per se when you have autonomous and platooning vehicles. But you can see that the infrastructure needs to be built envisioning this new type of movement. And so this is a dynamic board. So this might change, speed limits might change dynamically, and also which lane serves which purpose or which mode might change. You can see here as well, they're also envisioning wireless charging. So these vehicles will be electric and will be highway charging as you move through the lanes for transit vehicles and perhaps even regular vehicles. And so they also have transit vehicles on the arterials as well, and regular buses. Then there's the mobility hub concept, which is really intended to be the transfer points. It is also the mobility hub concept in San Diego is also a little broader in what traditional mobility hubs are. This is what a traditional mobility hub looks like. But in San Diego, they're looking at what is really a travel shed or an area upon which sufficient people can access the transit network. So it has some relationship to land use and to the type of density that needs to be built for this kind of system to be successful in some areas. And then the flexible fleets, it's essentially it goes from traditional carpooling, which is already a program of the MPO, and then you look at bike share here, any type of micromobility, scooters, segways, personal transportation system, and you also have here autonomous vehicles that ideally would be shared or can be sort of hop on out of the transit system and go your last mile in a shared vehicle. Obviously, delivery as well urban delivery is going to be more and more important these days. So that's also being considered as in the transportation system. And then ultimately, the next OS here is really depicted as the information that is provided in the transportation system. So this is a traditional way of depicting connected vehicles. So you can have freight vehicles platooning here over the highway. and you have these vehicles communicating with each other and also communicating with the infrastructure. So connected vehicles communicated with the infrastructure. And there's a particular lane here, because if you have connected vehicles, there's a different type of movement that can happen, and safety can be, is a different element, let's say. So you might have special lanes for connected vehicles. And obviously, it's also very important to ensure equity. And so kiosks or Wi-Fi, even if you have a smartphone and don't have Wi-Fi, hopefully by 2050, we won't have that those type of digital divides, but it is important to envision that anyone can access this information platform through any means, even if they don't have a mobile device. Here's another concept of an arterial. So you just saw the highway concept. This is more of an arterial where you can see another part of the element is the drop-off and pickup points. So this is how you would allocate for drop-off and pickup in front of a transit station, for example, have to navigate drop-off and pickup of small fleets or flexible fleets with the stops for the larger transit system as well. You can see electric charging over here off-site, and you can see the active transportation network, the infrastructure, high-quality infrastructure for this type of vehicle, also wireless charging in the arterials, and even some infrastructure connected vehicles all purpose. So this is a way that the vehicles will communicate with the infrastructure and denotes connected vehicle environment. So even arterials will be managed in some way through information. So that concludes my overview of what San Diego is doing to try to reach sustainable requirements. And I have been thinking lately, as we experience this new transportation system, what does it look like post-COVID-19, and how do we need to plan for it? It might be that, we very quickly get over this and it's a blip in our history, but it can also mean that we have lasting impact to how we plan and think about transportation infrastructure. And so two elements is what I'm looking at and thinking of most today. I don't think anyone can really plan for it yet, but or predict it yet, but we can see, we can suspect that travel behavior might change significantly. There might be more remote work going forward. I think if this is working for a lot of people, this is what it might look like, at least in the near term. Definitely more freight and urban delivery. We are going to get even more quickly, we're going to get used to ordering online and having goods delivered to our home. So less VMT, perhaps, if we think about those, less VMT from remote work, but more VMT from freight and urban delivery. How does it add up to the vehicle miles traveled in general? And then other things that I'm thinking about, what does it mean for land use? Are we now going to think that it's maybe safer to live a little further apart? Density might not be as attractive anymore. And it's been said that in areas that are denser, the spread of the pandemic can be worse. And in fact, that is one of the ways that we started to spread out early on, because we felt, as a society, we felt like cities were filthy and filled of disease, let's say. And so it was an escape to rural areas that transportation systems and transportation technology like the automobile or even the streetcars allowed us to live further out and still work in the city and raise your family in a more wholesome environment per se. So it was a societal view. And so I am thinking about what are the ways that this pandemic might refocus how we see density. And then also safety, just in general terms, are we going to think, people might not think that safety, that the transportation system is safe. We have, there's some indication that people felt bikes were safer in New York bike share went up slightly rather than the public transit system. So are we going to prioritize individual forms of transportation, such as a bicycle or a scooter, instead of a bus or a shared vehicle? And so what modes will really offer the lowest risk of viral contagion, if that's what we're looking at? And so it's a really interesting time right now to think about how these what we're experiencing right now will change, and no one really knows, but we're trying to think about what are the implications in the short term and in the long range about the shifts or perspective of the transportation system. And that's it. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to present here.
Great, thank you so
Anthony,
much.
hi.
Thank you so much, Loriana. That was a great presentation. Same as before, we'll continue to collect questions, and we'll have both presenters answer questions after our next presentation. So for right now, we'll move on to Angelo. And Angelo, if you're ready, you can share your screen.
Go ahead. Okay. Let me join on the video here. All right, everybody can see me, see my screen?
Yes, you're all set. Thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you, Anthony, and thank you again to Lindsay and everyone who set up this workshop today. Really happy to be here presenting via webinar. Grateful for the opportunity to have all these really productive conversations and great presentations throughout yesterday and today. So yeah, my name is Angelo Falabella. I am a sustainability analyst at New York City Department of Environmental Protection, and I'll be presenting today on strengthening New York City DEP sustainability through programmatic application of it. So just, sorry, 1 second. There we go. Just some quick learning objectives for today. We hope to understand through this presentation how New York City DEP uses the Envision rating system, how we have incorporated the tenets of Envision into design and construction, give a little overview comparing version 2 and version 3 frameworks and what that looks like on a programmatic level as we continue to pivot our program as different regulations and things like Envision adjust. And then lastly, Envision in practice through 2 case studies today. So just briefly, agenda, talk about DEP as a whole, who we are, what our purpose is, how we have used Envision at DEP, the reporting methods we have, and the results that we're seeing in our program. 2 case studies, and then some programmatic changes and what we see as next steps for our program here. So DEP Vision. New York City DEP is the largest wastewater and wastewater utility in the United States. We have approximately 6,000 employees and an annual budget of $3.8 billion. So our main services are the water supply for New York City, which delivers 1.1 billion gallons of water to 9.6 million New Yorkers every day and maintains 7,000 miles of water mains. The Bureau of Water Supply also protects our 2,000 square mile watershed, including 19 reservoirs and 3 controlled lakes. Wastewater treatment treats 1.3 billion gallons of wastewater each day, operates and maintains 14 in-city wastewater resource recovery facilities, 96 wastewater pumping stations, and 7,500 miles of sewers. And we are also the regulator for air, noise, and hazardous waste. So we update and enforce air code as well as hazardous waste and noise pollution. Now I work within the Bureau of Engineering, Design, and Construction, which if you were on the webinar yesterday, Ashley from NV5 discussed how they work with DDC, the Department of Design and Construction, to handle various construction projects from New York City Department of Transportation and New York City Department of Environmental Protection. So a lot of our smaller like green infrastructure installations and such go through DDC, but our larger capital projects are done in-house through the Bureau of Engineering, Design, and Construction. Whether we have a consultant designing or an in-house design team, we manage it in this bureau. So this sustainability section is within that bureau here. So we're able to apply sustainability to all of these projects, which are maybe traditional gray infrastructure projects such as tunnels or treatment plants, but we're able to actually look at it through sustainability by implementing it through our program here. So Bureau of Engineering, Design, and Construction manages approximately $21 billion of projects in construction or design, and provides in-house engineering services to the operating bureaus of water supply, distribution, and treatment. And then just a brief, our vision statement: to be a world-class water and wastewater utility while building a sustainable future for all New Yorkers. So this really shows the importance of having an active sustainability program in DEP so that we can make sure all the capital projects that we are building are targeted towards developing a sustainable future for water supply and wastewater treatment. So how does DEP actually go about using Envision? This is just taking a step back, looking at the timeline of how we were developed our sustainability program here. We created it initially based on the triple bottom line concept, as well as largely motivated by some broader New York City strategic plans like Plan NYC. And more recently, a lot of our initiatives have been driven by One NYC, which are kind of our broad citywide goals. And then early on, we identified Envision as a flexible system that we thought would be useful. We were looking to develop some kind of rating system, and we looked into approximately 50 different rating systems, some more well-known like Envision and LEED, some less well-known. We considered developing our own rating system similar to what Port Authority has done. And ultimately, we decided that Envision would be the best way to go forward, as it not only is flexible and could fit all of our projects, but it also made sure that we would have that third-party certification compared to developing our own system. And then in 2016, these third-party rating systems became mandated by Local Law 32, and it is largely focused on mandating LEED achievement. However, we were able to justify that Envision also meets those requirements, and therefore going forward, we made sure that our program would be well suited to ensure compliance with Local Law 32 by designing projects through our programmatic approach to apply to Envision. So we incorporated concepts and metrics from Envision into the existing sustainability program in even greater detail than they already had been. So this is a pretty familiar project delivery timeline to most of you. This is the same timeline we follow for all of our project, whether it's $1 million project or $1 billion project. So we'll have an initial business case review where the sustainability section is able to provide some input, get an idea of any local law compliance issues or large sustainability opportunities that we would like to highlight in the contract of the project. Then going into planning, we have a preliminary sustainability workshop, and this is the big milestone workshop where we are able to sit down with all the stakeholders for the project, and we set goals on our 4 different key performance indicator categories. So sustainable sites, energy, climate change, environmental impacts, and greenhouse gas emissions. When we are at that workshop, we discuss all the opportunities that we see on that project and which ones are worth pursuing at this point. And we also discuss third-party rating systems at this point because it is an opportunity for us to incorporate Envision into the beginning of the project in the planning phase and make sure that it is engaged throughout the entire design lifecycle. Further into design, we have our second workshop, which is a deep dive sustainability workshop. At that workshop, we're able to make some more data-driven decisions. So we have various reports that are due prior to that. And based on those reports, we're actually able to decide what's actually feasible based on the numbers for things like energy reductions, and construction waste reduction and such. And then going to the end of design, we have our preliminary Envision submission, and then at the end of construction, the final submission. So through all of that, we have incorporated Envision throughout our entire program, and whether a project is submitting to Envision or not, we've developed our program to report out on various metrics. So the core of it is really aimed at quantifying sustainability on all of our projects. So we've developed a series of standard operating procedures which apply throughout design. So these standard operating procedures are a wide variety of topics ranging from energy reports to climate, stormwater, recycling regional content, construction waste, and so on. Each of these reports gives us a lot of data for each project, and they are incorporating what the data requirements would be for the Envision application, as well as other related New York City guidelines and local laws. So following all of these standard operating procedures generally will keep a project in compliance with local laws, give us the information we need on the project for data tracking, and also set it up well for an Envision application. Just to zoom in on one of these standard operating procedures, SOP 052 is the one that guides us on our sustainability rating systems. So any project that is going to look at this SOP will, at the very least, pursue Envision to the stage of a checklist. So they'll actually fill out the checklist and use that checklist to identify opportunities for incorporating sustainability into the project. And if it makes sense for the project to pursue an Envision application, this SOP will guide it through that process as well. And one major cue that we did take from Envision in how Envision is structured to make certain credits non-applicable, we are able to adjust the applicability of these reports based on the scope of the project. So for example, if we have a bridge project, we wouldn't be expecting a very detailed energy profile report. So it's able to be adjusted per the scope of the project, but it provides a strong baseline to work with. So some initial results of our program here. As I mentioned, all capital projects are using Envision as a tool to identify opportunities for incorporating sustainability. Our SOPs are based on the Envision rating system, so the reporting requirements will keep us in compliance with local laws, as well as provide a strong case for the Envision applications. And some initial stats, we have 14 projects currently registered with ISI, 27 are in progress of full certification through various stages of the design life cycle. 15 are utilizing the checklist on the ISI website, and we have 3 that have been fully awarded at this point. And we also have 2 lead projects. Most of our projects are unoccupied infrastructure, so we do have occasionally an occupied building that might make more sense for lead. But in general, we're focused on Envision. So 2 case studies today, really briefly. The first is the Esopus Creek Bridge replacement. So this is a really cool project. It's an upstate project. Upstate as in it's north of the city. So we have the watershed in the Catskills here in New York. And we maintain a number of bridges, reservoirs, lakes, roads, and such to both protect the watershed and to maintain constant delivery of water to New York City. So these 2 bridges, the Esopus Creek Bridge, which is shown here, highlighted in yellow, and then the Railroad Bridge here, are both in varying states of disrepair and need significant structural repairs. So we'll be replacing the bridges as well as the roadway highlighted. So in order to maintain travel and minimize the detour for the local community, we're actually going to be building the new bridges and the roadway adjacent to the existing so that we won't be disrupting the community as much. We'll also be, this abandoned railway here is slated to become a rail trail. So through communication with the local community, we determined that they would like to see a pedestrian connection to that rail trail. So we're providing a dedicated protected bike lane and pedestrian lane with a parking area here for visitors to the rail trail. We're also reconfiguring this intersection to be a DOT standard T-type intersection, as this has been identified as the source of many accidents in the area. So this is safety improvement. Similarly, straightening this S-curve on the left side of the screen for safety improvements as well. This project is anticipated for notice to proceed in May of this year and substantial completion by June 2025. It's approximately a $38 million project. Some highlights of the Envision application for this project: enhancing public space and improving access for the local community. That's heavily focused on the rail trail connections. Preserving views and local character. We made sure that the new bridge designs are consistent with local character. Signage and wayfinding improvements through things like improving the safety of those intersections and the roadway. We have an established sustainability management system on all of our projects, and through that, active stakeholder involvement through community meetings and such. And for resource allocation, we're projecting a 90% diversion of waste from landfills, as well as 25% recycled materials. Now, this may seem a little low. However, being a road and bridge replacement, it is mostly asphalt. So we're projecting about 40% recycled asphalt. And then 100% regional materials. Also, through all of this, we have implemented sustainable stormwater management.
It looks like we may have lost Angelo briefly. Hopefully he'll be able to join in shortly. In the meantime, I'll just use the time now to make some final comments, and then hopefully if Angelo pops back on, we can get him back to finish his presentation. It was really a great presentation, so I'm disappointed that it got cut off. As you all may have known, for those of you who are attending the series, yesterday we began the series with a panel on economic analysis and the business case of sustainability. We then moved into the afternoon session with a panel on the importance of commitment and organizational change around sustainability. And there we had examples from the private sector with Tom Lewis of WSP. We also had an example of the public sector with Chris Lebon from LA Metro, as well as nonprofits with the American Society of Civil Engineers, recent commitments and initiatives around sustainable infrastructure. So we saw the full spectrum from public, private, and nonprofit, the importance of sustainability commitments. And then this morning, again, in the first panel that you saw, we moved into design guidelines and planning. And then here with Loriana and Angelo, deep dives into transportation and water sectors. So we're kind of going from the very high level down to the detailed level and the importance of sustainability in every step of that process. And Lindsay will say more later, but it looks like we did get Angelo back. So Angelo, if you are able and would like to maybe wrap up your presentation, that would be good.
Yeah, hi Anthony, sorry, it looks like my internet cut out. They are ripping up the road outside, and I am worried that someone may have done something there. So infrastructure upgrades. So I just called in from my phone, wondering if, Lindsay, if you have my slides, if you could just throw one of them up there for me.
Absolutely. Let me get them up here for you. Just one moment.
Thank you.
And for those on the call, we did mention, we will extend for those of you who can stay till 12:15 in order to answer questions and continue. For those of you who are able to join this afternoon, that would be great. And
Alrighty.
Great, thank you so much. So quickly wrapping up the Hunts Point digester upgrade here, just wanted to highlight a few things. So this is a version 3 project, and the digesters are being replaced. These are the anaerobic digesters for the wastewater resource recovery facility. The Hunts Point wastewater resource recovery facility is a dry weather flow capacity of 200 million gallons per day, serving a population of 685,000 people. So this is one of our larger wastewater resource recovery facilities in the city here. The new digesters will be using a brownfield up in the top left corner of the screen there. It's an unused site, so we'll be remediating that brownfield, converting part of it into a park for the local community. And then the digesters have also been designed to accept food waste to promote expansion of the city's composting program. There are opportunities to increase the quality of the digester gas and use at a nearby cogen facility. And by increasing the efficiency of the digester gas, we'll be reducing the volume of sludge cakes coming out of the digester, which is in line with New York City's goal for zero waste to landfill. This was also performed an extensive climate analysis, as we do with all of our in-city projects, and was designed to the most stringent FEMA standards. Lindsay, if you can go to the next slide. Thank you. So that highlights most of the things. Just wanted to reiterate through restoring the brownfield and creating a new public space for a park. We're done a lot of work with the community for that. We've also we're anticipating 100% diversion of waste from landfills and 89% regional material. Additionally, landscaping and sidewalk repairs to improve the park access and minimize to no pesticide or fertilizer use in the new park. And lastly, this facility, through designing to the most stringent FEMA standards, is well prepared for long and short-term hazards. Next slide. So I'm just going to quickly cover some programmatic adjustments that we've made from version 2 to version 3. So as many of you know, there's been some significant changes. Multiple credits were rewritten, combined, and added. I'm not going to cover all of them by any means. I just want to highlight a few new opportunities and challenges that we've identified. So you can click next again, and one more time. So RA 1.5 divert waste from landfills has been split into the new credits, which are reducing operational and construction waste. So currently we have a very robust construction waste tracking program at DEP, and we're looking to understand better what kind of operational waste each of our facilities are producing. Many are pretty minimal, largely based on wastewater pumping station screenings and such. So we're looking at opportunities for reuse and reducing that waste. And new challenges, reducing energy consumption has been also split into an operational and a construction component. So our current energy reporting mechanism is largely focused on operational energy, but we are looking to tracking construction energy use more in detail. So right now we just have some best practices that are implemented, and we're developing some ways to actually quantify that going forward. And then the last one that I wanted to mention is the combination of reducing net embodied energy and using regional materials into quantifying net embodied carbon. So we have a reporting structure right now for regional material, and we are looking forward to using that as a baseline, which basically provides the building blocks to quantifying net embodied carbon. So that is one of the big changes that we're going to be implementing into our program, is to actually provide a reporting structure to quantify net embodied carbon and come up with strategies to reduce that. So overall next steps, integrating construction credits tracking. We're still largely focused on planning and design, and we're looking to get more into tracking throughout the construction of a project, whether that's potable water use, energy, or waste. We are working to identify more opportunities for community engagement and improve quality of life impacts, using Envision quality of life credits as a way to quantify the intangibles of different quality of life improvements for the communities that we're serving. And lastly, quantifying net embodied carbon. So overall, the point that I'm making here is you can see how we have this robust program here at DEP with a variety of standard operating procedures and reporting structures that do pull a lot from Envision, as well as compliance with local laws. And having this programmatic approach allows us to go from project to project, understanding how we can improve the program with each opportunity on every new project, how to build the program up with the new developments that each project is able to take on. And as major changes such as new local laws or an Envision update comes along, we don't have to rewrite an entire program, but rather we can go and revise a single standard operating procedure to update as needed. So we're able to move along much more in a much more agile way. And our last slide here is just, again, DEP vision statement to be a world-class water and wastewater utility while building a sustainable future for all New Yorkers. And just a reminder that for all of these typical gray infrastructure projects, there are ways to apply sustainability, all of them, whether it's a simple wastewater pumping station upgrade or a full-on tunnel from one reservoir to another. We're able to identify the opportunities in each and fit our program to make sense for that. So thank you for dealing with the technical difficulties, and feel free to reach out to me. There's my email should you have any further questions after the Q&A as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Angelo. As mentioned, we'll move on to questions for both Angelo and Laureana. Very quickly, because I know if those of you do have to log off, thank you so much for joining today. I also always like to give a special thank you to ISI's founder organizations, the American Society of Civil Engineers, the American Public Works Association, and the American Council of Engineering Companies. Also a special thank you to our co-host, Harvard University's Zofnass Program for Sustainable Infrastructure, who have been our partners on Envision since the very beginning. And as I mentioned yesterday, foremost in our thoughts right now, also our ICMQ, the Italian certification body that administers Envision in Italy, based out of Milan. And of course, they're in some of the worst conditions right now. So we're thinking of them. We'll move on then directly to the comments, and we'll continue to go to 12:15 for any of those of you who are able to stay. So the first question for Laureana, we had someone ask, have the fixed route tram systems widely used in Europe been considered for San Diego? And how do you count the vehicle miles traveled of the transit vehicles? Should you also be counting passenger miles? And Laureana, you're still muted. There you go.
Okay, I was double muted. So I didn't hear the second question, but you said the first question was about fixed route transit in Europe.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, so let's go with that one, and then now I'm going to ask you to repeat the second one, the second part of that question. So yes, definitely what we're looking at in San Diego is transit leap, but it is about what kind of rapid transit system works in the San Diego region. So high-speed rail has been considered with dedicated guideway. Now, you also have to look at the difference of land use. And once we get into the cost-benefit analysis of really what is the potential ridership of a system like that, given the conditions that have been developing in the San Diego metropolitan area over the last 50 years with our highway-dominated type of transportation system, then the numbers don't make as much sense as with the land use that Europe has, for example. So that is, we started by simply, without looking at cost-benefit, what is a system that can compete with the automobile? And then we started doing refinements as to really what is the most appropriate type of system in which places. And so in more areas in the United States, this is sort of a generalization, but I would, my sense would be, is always like BRT, bus rapid transit, where it is an actual rapid system, where it has subway type platforms, boarding, and it has headways and can maintain high speeds on the highway because stops are spread apart, such as in commuter rail. In those situations, I think bus rapid transit is going to be better in terms of return on investment, and it's also going to be more flexible given the land use patterns that we've developed. So it is a difficult decision to make, particularly when the Metropolitan Planning Organization does not have land use authority. So even though we can make projections about transportation or where we might want land use to be developed, land use authority is really driven by each of the different cities. In San Diego, it's only 18 cities, but in many other areas, there's many, many more municipal jurisdictions that make independent decisions of land use and growth and the type of uses. So growth is not, land use and growth is really not managed at a top level in the United States. So it becomes harder to plan for these type of transit systems.
Great.
And then the second question.
The second question was
part
just
of it.
whether you look at vehicle miles traveled or passenger miles traveled in your assessments.
Yes. Yes. So so there are a couple of constraints that we have to look at. The California Air Resource Board sets the modeling. It's a model tool for how to estimate greenhouse gas emissions based on vehicle miles traveled. And so there is transit systems are, for example, excluded from VMT for greenhouse gas emissions. So in some ways, you do have a slight benefit when you're trying to do transportation, general transportation systems. So when you do VMT, we are looking at the number of vehicles that will be on the road, and the more that we share. So traditional occupancy in the United States, we used about 1.1 occupancy, which is very low. And we are looking through flexible fleets, through operating systems, can we increase that assumption of occupancy so that there will be more people with less vehicles. So that is essentially, there is a correlation between person throughput versus vehicle throughput that we're exploring. And we're trying to understand in which ways we can make informed assumptions about people trips versus vehicle sort of person miles traveled versus vehicle miles traveled. So it is definitely something that we're trying to do as part of this project.
Great, thank you. Angelo, I might do the same and send you two questions at once, both just more technical questions. So one question asked if you could explain more about the sustainability management system that you all use. And the second question being, any insights or strategies for how DEP plans to quantify net embodied carbon?
Sure. Okay. So for the first question, we have a standard operating procedure for how to develop a sustainability management plan, essentially. So each project will develop a sustainability management plan at the very beginning of the facility planning phase as part of their project management plan. And it's further refined throughout facility planning. And then they'll come up with another one in design for how they plan to go through the design phase. And then through the actual construction phase, there are a designated sustainability representative from the contractor who is responsible for developing certain plans, such as construction waste management and new material implementation plans, as well as all of the Envision tracking evidence documentation. So it's essentially a sequence of sustainability management plans that are continuously refined throughout the facility planning and design phases. For the second question, how we plan to quantify net embodied carbon, we are basically at a point now where we have a recycler and regional content plan that every project develops, which currently quantifies each material by weight and what the regional and recycled content of those materials are. We've been slowly implementing each project to not only name an assumed percentage based on the market, but rather specific manufacturers, so that we're able to tie the manufacturer to the material, or at least a number of manufacturers, so that we avoid any sole sourcing restrictions. from that, we're able to pull directly like the distance that's traveled, as well as directly from the manufacturer if they have any environmental product declarations and such. So we're essentially at this point where we're developing a database of this information. And then going forward, we have some projects that are early in facility planning, which we know will be pursuing Envision. And we are asking them to look into developing a more detailed calculator of net embodied carbon that we hope to eventually roll out across all projects.
Great, thank you. Well, I think unfortunately that brings us to the end of our time today, but as mentioned, ISI staff will, for those of you who submitted comments that didn't get answered, we'll try to work with the presenters to send you responses to those. I would note one that was not a question, but a comment that we received, that Envision is also used throughout small and medium-sized communities as well. And so far the presentations have mostly been large cities, so it was a request that maybe in future presentations, we also offer more perspectives from small and medium-sized communities, which I thought was a great comment and suggestion that we received. Again, thank you so much to our speakers, Loriana Marciante and Angelo Falabella. Wonderful presentations. I really appreciated them, and especially Angelo with the New York City Department of Environmental Protection, longtime Envision user. You could just see from the number of projects that you all have put through verification and self-assessments. I think it was a great opportunity for those on the call who maybe are looking at their first Envision verification or are looking to do their first self-assessment. A lot of great inputs and insights from an organization that has been doing this for quite a long time. So thank you again. And I already made my previous closing remarks, so I'll just go straight to Lindsay to wrap out for some technical guidance for those of you submitting for your ENVSP requirements, as well as what's coming up next.
That does wrap up this morning's webinar presentation. I hope you're able to join us this afternoon and for a future live webinar. Until next time, thank you so much for being leaders in the infrastructure industry as we work together to build a more sustainable future.